Hey everyone! Today on the plastic canvas we're painting Ghost from Mansions of Madness. From the plastic canvas, and welcome to the first video in this Mansions of Madness miniature painting series. Mansions of Madness is a co-op exploration game where players take on the role of paranormal investigators, I guess they're called, going into different locations to investigate some strange goings on. Really thematic. There's an app that goes along with it to help tell the story and keep track of all the stats of the enemies and all those different sorts of things. Absolutely love this game, and the miniatures in it are pretty cool. They're not up there with the best ones going around, but they are pretty cool. And so, seeing as you're investigators, going in, horror-themed game, sort of a Lovecraftian theme. There, of course, needs to be some bad guys to be going up against, and this is one of them. This here is Ghost. You can see in the base of the minis, there's these different little spots here. There's a card that gets inserted, and it just gives you that these numbers are referred to during the game. Got the name there, and on the back we've got some sort of thematic text. So, flickering and unreal, ghosts are spirit of the departed, drifting through the world of the living. Now, on each of these cards, they do have some artwork on there. If I bring in one from a different character, a Dunwich Horror, you can see that there's some artwork. Can't get the card out though, so yeah, can't show you that one unfortunately. Now, I am painting it on the base because we glued all of these down probably a couple of years ago when we got the game, well before I started painting minis, and I'm not going to bother chopping it off. So yeah, painting on the base. So as you can see, this guy here is not primed, and this is the first video in which I'll actually be priming. I'm still working with my brush-on primer. If you're wondering why I'm using a brush-on primer as opposed to a spray-on primer, check out one of the early Zombie 15 videos, especially the Siphon video. I talk about it a bit there, and so if you've sort of been watching these videos so far, in the interest of those that have already heard about that, I won't go into that again, but yeah, check that out to see why. So seeing as this is the first video in which I'll be priming, I thought I'd actually show you the primer. So the primer that I've got is not, strictly speaking, one like made specifically for minis. It is an acrylic primer. That's the label there. This is so I live in Australia. This is an Australian company that's made this one. I'm sure there's equivalent of these in different parts of the world. But yeah, plastic is one of the things that it can be used on. But straight out of the pot, it's very thick. And so it does need to be thinned down quite a lot, and I've got some in my just in my palette here ready to go, and you can see just from the consistency that I've got, it might be hard to tell there, but I've thinned it quite heavily down to the consistency of a normal paint. So it's just a case of brushing it on, and yeah, it's been working really well so far. So yeah, we'll be going to a spray-on primer, but for the moment it's doing the job. So yeah, so we're gonna prime him, and then it'll be left for 24 hours, and then in the next part of the video after it's primed, I'll then talk about what I'm actually going to do with him. But yeah, for the moment, first step, just priming. Alright, so there we go, so that's got him primed. Obviously a brush-on primer takes longer than a spray-on primer, but that was about maybe 90 seconds of painting there. It really doesn't take long. Just with the brush that I'm using, this is just one of the ones that I got in my first pack that I bought back when I started. these are rubbish, but I've kept them around for you know, just doing some painting with it where the bristles might get a little bit ruined. And so this is a size 8, so it's a really big one. It's the only thing that I keep it around for is just priming, because it just helps just cover the area a bit quicker. Obviously, you know, an important thing, regardless of whether you're using a brush on or spray on primer, but especially with the brush on primer, is just checking to make sure that it hasn't pulled anywhere in some spots where there's some detail, where it's going to cover that detail up. So what I usually do is if I do notice that's happened anywhere, like maybe just a little bit across the top of the chain there, just on the paper towel, just wipe it off, just dry the brush off a bit, and then just kind of like if you were using a wash, just going back through and just lifting it back up with the brush, and then just making sure it's not pulling anywhere where it's going to cover up any details. But yeah, so he's primed. So he'll get left for about 24 hours just to really properly go off. And yeah, then we'll come back and I'll have a chat about what I'm going to do with him. Alright, so Ghost has been primed and had well and truly enough time to properly go off, so we've got a good bond against the plastic. So now we're ready to get onto some base coating. Now with Ghost, I can't get Ghost's card out of there, but he's got sort of a bit of an ethereal sort of glow kind of thing going on, I suppose. And so what I'm sort of thinking of doing to get, because I kind of want like a bit of a wispy sort of look about him, so I don't want any real like solid colour to Ghost, because being a ghost, you know, not a solid being, I don't want a solid colour, but I want there to be a bit of colour, so that you know, I can sort of work in a bit of that sort of glowing kind of look to him. So I'm thinking a green sort of tinge, and the way I'm thinking I might go about that is doing a white base coat and then just doing a green wash over the top of that. And whether I do 1 or 2 coats, I'm not sure at the moment. That'll depend on how it looks after having 1 coat. And then just doing some dry brushing with like normal green paint, but just progressively putting more and more white into it until I get to the point where I'm just highlighting like the very top of his head and just the tops of his hands and shoulders, so that yeah, really bright spots up on top, and then feeding down to a darker green sort of at the bottom, but at no point any of that colour is going to be really solid. It'll still sort of have that ghostly, wispy sort of glow to it. But yeah, we'll see how that looks. It's not something that I've done on anything before, just painting with a wash in that style. So yeah, and there's some chains on him that I'm going to do in a bit of a rusty kind of look, but we'll get to that one. We'll get to that a little bit later when up to that stage. But yeah, so just going to do a white base coat at the moment, and then when that's properly dry, then a green wash over the top. See how that's looking, whether I need a second wash or not, second coat. And yeah, then I'll be doing some dry brushing after that. Just quickly while I'm going through with this coat, like normally, you know, obviously you want to be thinning down your paint so that they're going on smooth. You get they don't dry chalky or bumpy or anything like that, and you know, it just makes it easier to control the flow of the paint, and then you don't, you know, fill in any detail because it's too thick. But you don't want to go too far and make it so thin that it runs. But I'm putting this on much more thinly than what I normally would. So I've got quite a bit of water going in with the white paint. And the reason for that is because it's kind of acting a little bit like a wash, in that over the black prime, the whites pooling in those recesses a little bit more, so that's where most of the white is settling. And then on those more raised edges where it's the paint isn't pooling quite so much, the black's coming through a little bit more. And I'm just sort of hoping that that might give an extra bit of an effect when the wash then goes over the top, because obviously some of the wash will sit on the high spots. Not all of it will flow into the recesses, but where it flows into the recesses, the green wash is going to have more of that white undercoat there to bring that sort of more solid colour out. But on those higher points, there won't be as much white for the green to stand out on. And I don't know, it might not work, but I'm just sort of hoping that gives just an extra bit of an effect there, because it won't be as sort of consistent, I suppose. But yeah, we'll see how that ends up looking. So anyway, so there's a quick base coat on him. He's not going to get a second coat. That'll be it. And then I'm going to do the green wash over the top when it's properly dry, so that the wash and the paint don't mix together at all. And then yeah, I'll check out how he's looking after one coat and see if we need another. So there we go. Sort of undercoat done. Alright, so Ghost has had a really good bit of time for that white undercoat to dry properly. That was the last thing that I did last night my time, now into the following night. So he's had pretty well a day to dry properly. Obviously doesn't need anywhere near that amount of time to dry, but anytime I'm going to be using washes, it's not a bad idea to finish the night with the step before, and then go on to the wash the next day. Just because there's been a couple of times where I've used a wash a little bit too quickly after doing the coat of paint before that. I thought it was dry enough, but when using the wash, it sort of mixed in a funny way with the paint underneath, and then sort of clumped in the bristles a bit, or working the other way where I've done a wash and then gone to then do some painting over the top, thought the wash again was dry enough, wasn't the case, and then the paint has mixed in a funny way with the wash. I guess because they're sort of different animals, they don't mix too well together. So yeah, I always make sure I wait with give it plenty of time to really dry properly before going on to a wash or then painting over the top of a wash. But anyway, so we're good to go. So now I'm going to do a green wash over the whole Mini, and rather than using the wash to actually paint the Mini or to try and turn it green, it's going to be going on a little bit thin. Like, it won't be watered down or anything, but I'll be spreading it around quite a bit, because I want the white undercoat to still come through, so it gives just more of a green tint rather than a solid green colour to Ghost, because he is a ghost, sort of want that a bit of ethereal sort of glow kind of thing happening. And I'll let that dry properly and then see if I think it needs a second coat or not. So for this I'm using Build Tan Green out of my Citadel's washes. I just got a Citadel wash set, and yeah, so that's the green that I've got. And yeah, so not thinned down, just straight from the pot, but a bit of water on the brush just to help it sort of flow. And yeah, it'll be going on thin, just in terms of spreading it around quite a bit, rather than going back and sort of getting lots of wash. But anyway, so we'll see how it goes. I'm not sort of exactly sure how it's going to turn out, whether I'll get the effect that I want or not, but yeah, one way to find out. There we go, so there's one coat with the wash on Ghost. I can already see I'm probably going to do a second coat, just because, as it's obviously settled into the recesses and it's moved away from the high points. There's a couple of spots where I would like to get more a bit of a green tinge. I think you can probably pick it up here, just like on his knees and things like that. It's there's not really much green settled there at all, and I would like there to be green all over it. And then just just a little couple of spots here and there where I'd like there to be a bit more green. So I'll probably go back and do a second coat. But in terms of the effect, I'm really happy with that. Enough of that white still coming through, so we look sort of a bit wispy and not sort of necessarily solid, but yeah, definitely that green tinge to him. So I'll leave that for a while, give that a good dry, and then I'll come back and do probably a bit of a sparing second coat, I think, and I'll try and get a little bit more to pull in, like around the chain and things like that, just where that detail is that I want to bring out a little bit more, but really happy with that. So I won't stop and say anything before I get into the second coat. So when that's dry, I'll come back, do a second coat, try and pick out some of those details a little bit more and just make sure there is a bit of green everywhere. And then I'll come back after that and start doing some dry brushing to add a bit of contrast. Alright, so the wash has had a really good bit of time to dry, so that as the next step, which will be the dry brushing, goes on, that paint isn't going to mix in with the wash in a funny way. So yeah, basically the next step is just going to be doing a dry brush, catching all the raised edges where the light's going to be hitting, so you know, on the top of the knees, top of the head, top of the hands, chains, top of the feet, all those sorts of areas. And that'll be with some green mixed with a little bit of white, and then I'll mix in a bit more white and dry brush a little bit less, and then mix in a bit more white and then dry brush a little bit less, and just keep repeating that process, so then every layer is covering less area as it gets closer and closer to the highest level of light concentration, and at that point it'll be almost pure white. So by the time I've done, you know, several coats and get into the point where the light's going to be hitting the most, so like right on the top of the head, right on the top of the hands, maybe just catching the edges of his knees, that'll be almost pure white. And what that should hopefully do is give a real focal point around his head, so that that's somewhere for your eye to draw to when looking at the Mini. So it'll be that step, and then painting the chains, which I'm going to do in a rusted sort of colour, because even though like he's a ghost and in theory the chains would sort of pass through, I want them to sort of stand out a little bit, and by doing them rusted they'll sort of look like they've been around for a little while and will sort of at least hopefully make a bit of sense being on a ghost. So yeah, so just going to start that process. So catch most of it with the green, with a little bit of white, and then just gradually dry brush less and less and less, and every time it's a bit less, there's a little bit more white mixed in. This is just a good little spot to show what the dry brushing is doing, because I've put the second sort of layer on this side where there's a little bit more white mixed in, and then if you go to the back where I haven't dry brushed that next coat, you can see the difference there. This side's obviously brighter, where those raised edges have been caught with the whiter green, whereas that side hasn't. So that gives you a good bit of an idea of what it's doing. So yeah, so with this coat I'm covering less than the previous one, just so that those recesses still stay, you know, sort of with a bit of shade. we go. So there's the dry brushing done on Ghost. So with that last bit of coat, literally just touched the top of his head, the raised parts of his face, tops of his shoulders, and just sort of caught the tips of his fingers there. And that was pretty well pure white. So yes, there were quite a few coats there. Everyone just got that little bit more white mixed in, and I dry brushed a little bit less and less. So with the first coat, it pretty well covered the whole mini. Obviously just catching the raised parts, but the raised parts across the whole thing, back and front. But then by the end, it was just top of his head, just the tops of the hair there, face, shoulders, and the tips of the hands, just those spots where most of the light's going to be catching. So now I've got that, you know, high contrast around the top there that feeds down into the recesses down there. So now the next step's going to be to paint the chains. So I'm going to base coat them just with the silver metallic that I've got, which is Blade Steel by Reaper, just to give a metallic base, and then I'm just going to mix up some orange, some brown, and some yellow, and then just do a rusty coat. So to get that, it'll be sort of an orange base, and then just kind of wet blend in some brown and some yellow just to create sort of some different tones within the rust. But yeah, so that's the next step. point there, I'm pretty happy to call base coating done on Ghost. I think I've sort of gotten to the point where I've got the effect that I wanted to have. There's that sort of green glow going on, and then got that contrast from the top down to the bottom with that dry brushing, and got the rusty chains going on. And then just for the eyes, I did 2 yellow dots and then just a finer white dot in the middle just to give them a bit of a glow. So what I'm going to do now with the base is I've got this paint here that I haven't used before. Wife actually picked this one up, but hasn't used it yet, so I'm thinking I might give this a go. So it's a Grelin Earth, and it's a texture paint. So what this does is you paint it on thick, and then as it dries, it will crack to give the effect of like an earthy, well, broken, dried sort of look. And then what I'm thinking I might do is it's going to dry in the same colour as what you can see that's in there. I'm then going to paint over it and wet blend in some greys and blacks and whites to create a stone look. So the end sort of look that I'm hoping I'll be able to get is that Ghost looks like he'll be on like a cracked stone path or sort of something like that. But yeah, so the thing that I need to do before that is to put a prime down on the base so that this will actually stick. So I'm just going to do a prime. I'll leave sort of like some uneven kind of edges. I don't want like a really smooth edge around it, so that it kind of gives the impression that it keeps going out from beyond where I'll finish painting it. So do some uneven edges, and then when that dries, then I'll do a thick coat of this over the top with my base brush that I've got. So I'm going to be testing this out and that brush and see what sort of an effect we get. And then yeah, some wet blending over that with some greys, blacks and whites to do a bit of a stony, concretey sort of look. So yeah, so prime and then onto that. Alright, so primer's gone off there. You can see it's a bit of a different sort of black there. So yeah, so just going to use this Grelin Earth now. Put this on pretty thick, just follow where I've primed there, and then as that dries, it should crack up and yeah, end up looking like cracked broken earth. And then I'll wet blend some blacks and greys and whites onto that to create a stony concrete sort of look. So I'm just going to use my basing brush that I've got, and yeah, we'll see how this looks. I'm not sure if it's going to work out, but give it a go. But yeah, pretty much the main thing as far as I know with this is just putting it on thick, being pretty generous with it. So here we are back, and that Grelin Earth base that I've put on there has dried and cracked up a bit, so that's given a pretty cool effect. Just looking for that sort of cracked, earthy sort of look. Now, sorry. Now I have seen this being used in a couple of different videos, and I have seen it crack more than what it has here. So I'm guessing I probably put it on a bit thin. Now we'll be using it again in the future, so that's just a bit of a lesson learned there. So next time I'll try and put it on a bit thicker and see if that helps with how much it cracks, but I'm still happy with how that looks. So now, just to finish off Ghost, I'm going to just wet blend some grey, black and white just across the whole surface there, just to create a sort of a stony, concretey kind of look, and that's what I'll be doing across each of the minis that has this sort of human sort of form to them. So yeah, so that's going to be our next step to finish it off. One thing that I will be mindful of as I'm painting is I want to try and avoid as much as possible the paint going in between the cracks and then going onto the actual base, because I want that black to still sort of come through, because that helps to bring out the cracks, has that contrast, but if the paint sort of seeps in between, it's going to dry obviously in there, and then that effect will be lost. So I'm just going to try and avoid the paint sort of going down in between as much as possible. Now, one other thing I wouldn't mind getting a little bit of feedback on is, so far I've had one light for each of my videos, and it's been the one to that side of the camera, and it's been that one there. So that's how the videos have looked so far. But I was thinking it was a bit dark, and obviously you get all the shadow over on this side, so I went and bought another light exactly the same, and it's now on that side, and it's that one there. So what I'd be interested to know is whether you think it is a big improvement. I can tell just from looking at the camera that it's looking pretty good, sort of that as opposed to that. Obviously it does throw a bit more light on the Mini, and so I would just be interested to see if you think this is too much light or if it's the right amount. But yeah, that's so just looking for a little bit of feedback there. Alright, so just going to get into doing this coat on the base. I do have some drying retarder in with the paint because it's I'm going to be wet blending, and that's just going to give me a little bit more time to actually blend. So yeah, so I'll be going carefully just to make sure I only hit the tops of the base and try and avoid the paint going in between the cracks as much as possible. So there we go, so that base is done now. Yeah, so I just simply blended some greys, blacks and whites together to create a stony effect. Grey was obviously the base, and then where I wanted to create more of an effect of light hitting, blended in some white, so I really sort of focused that on the edges of the sections that were more cracked than others. As you can see, like a section in here where there's a few cracks going on, I focused a bit of white there, whereas there were a couple of sections like there, and then just around the back in there where it didn't crack as much, so I didn't focus as much white there, and then just blended the black in more where not as much light's going to be catching, so down around the feet there to create a bit of a shadow sort of effect. And then I also painted just where some of the bigger cracks were. There's some sort of in there just next to his foot, and then just in here as well. Painted a little bit of black just in some of those bigger cracks just to really boost the contrast there, just to bring those cracks out as much as possible. So that's Ghost done. So there's only sort of one step left to go, and that's going to be to apply a matte varnish. So if you've been watching the videos so far, this is the second series. I did Zombie 15 before that. I didn't do any varnishing there just purely because of the number of minis, and also just with how really simple those minis were. I just didn't worry about spending the time putting a varnish on them, but because at the moment the topmost exposed layer of the Mini is the paint, if they get knocked or just from general wear and tear of playing the games, the paint can easily get chipped off. So the idea of a varnish is that varnish becomes the topmost exposed layer, and the varnish is much more hard wearing than the paint, and so it can take a lot more wear and tear without chipping than what just the paint itself can. So this is going to be my first time varnishing. Literally haven't varnished anything before, and this is my varnish that I've got here. So you can get different types of varnishes. Matte varnish is, it doesn't reflect at all, so the end look should be exactly the same as what as the paint. But then you can get, like a gloss varnish. There's different types, but sort of glosses at the other end, which will reflect quite a lot of light. So I've seen, from a few videos, people painting like some blood or wounds and tongues and things like that, things that should look kind of wet or reflective, paint them with a gloss. But this guy's going to get matte because there's nothing reflective on him. So again, just from the videos that I've watched, most people don't recommend watering this down at all. So I'm just going to put some into my palette here, and then with no water, just going to paint it all over, and then let that dry so that it forms a hard, clear layer around the whole surface of the Mini. And then if it gets knocked or anything like that, the paint won't chip because it's got that clear coat. So just give that a bit of a shake. Not sure how much I'm going to need, so I don't know, something like that. We'll see how we go. And I'm just going to use one of my older brushes. Just going to go with a size 4, just one of my older ones. And yeah, we'll see how we go. There we go, so that varnish has dried and Ghost looks no different. So that matte varnish has worked well there. There's no reflection going on there. So yeah, but we've got that good outer layer on there now that'll be more hard wearing than what the paint is. There is one little thing that I thought I'd point out. I don't know if you'll be able to pick it up, but if I bring that in close and hopefully we keep our focus, there's a spot just there where the varnish must have settled a bit, like it went on a little bit thicker than in some other spots. It looks like just in the chain there as well a little bit, where it's just dried a bit thick, and you can see it a little bit more than in any other spot. It's only there where it's obviously just pulled in that recess there, but yeah, so I thought I'd just point that out. So that's obviously a thing for future ones to be mindful of, is just making sure that it's all been evenly spread and isn't pulling anywhere, so that it doesn't, sort of get like a little bit of a glossy kind of look to it. There is a little bit of reflection, but it's not too bad. Really only noticed if you actually are looking for it, but definitely something to point out and to be mindful of. So now that varnish is done, Ghost is finished. So that's our first Mansions of Madness Mini done. So thank you very, very much for spending the time to watch another one of my videos. I really, really hope you found something useful in here to use in your own painting, or just at the very least you've enjoyed watching. As I always ask, please do leave a comment down below, something about the video that you liked and something that you think could be improved. I do want these videos to be as good as possible for everyone, and I can't do that on my own. I need your feedback to help with that. So yeah, so please do leave a comment down below, and please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed, to keep up to date with these videos as they keep coming out. So this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.